Uhuru, my name is Coco Lewis. I'm the International Secretary of the African National Women's Organization, ANWO, and I'm your MC for tonight's political education. African Women Must Lead with Yejide Oromila is a series of live monthly political education programs from the African National Women's Organization, led by President Yejide Oromila. Tonight's topic is reparations now, which will lead a study of the party's history of forwarding the African reparations demand in the U.S. and abroad. There will be opportunities to raise issues pertaining to this PE during the Q&A period, but please comment and engage throughout the program. African Women Must Lead is being multi-streamed live on the Burning Spear TV and AMWO channels on YouTube, and will uh, not Anwa's Facebook page, but Anwa's Instagram and also, I believe, on X. Please take the time to like, share, and follow us on the platforms. Anwa is also on Instagram and Twitter for folks who want to keep up with us and what we're doing between broadcasts. And if you'd like to know the exact dates of future streams, make sure to follow us and check our website for more details. Uhuru, welcome, President Yejide.
Um, I'm here. Sorry.
I'm like, I can hear you.
I'm here. I'm here.
There
I'm
you
here. I
go.
promise. There I am. I promise. I was um welcome, comrade. Thank you so much for
So
that
we just found out
introduction.
that Facebook is not working again. So apologies. I'll go ahead and send a link over for everyone to join us on
Okay.
YouTube.
I just did that. I put it on the Facebook and that's what was taking me so long. But
Oh,
anyway, welcome everyone. Everyone, because that's what we have right now. And so African Women Must Lead with Yejide Oromila. I appreciate Comrade Coco for that introduction. And today's presentation of PE um, is talking about reparations and the party's long history of making the reparations demand. And and what I'm going to do is just talk about some important points. But the reason why we're talking about reparations now is because of Black History Month, and we're halfway through. We're on February 16th, 2024, and this is the month where Black people talk about Black stuff and all the historical figures and all the things that are important that happened to African people during our long, long history. But sometimes you don't feel like it's your long history. Sometimes it's like the history talk starts at wherever border you were colonized inside of. So people tend to talk about, like in the United States, certain people, Harriet Tubman, Benjamin Banneker, Martin Luther King, maybe Malcolm X. They sometimes don't talk about him. Um, and just really highlight, important figures that really go along with the United States or whatever your border is, like, sort of idea of trying to make this a more inclusive, a better way for people to live. So that's why they choose certain folks like Benjamin Banneker, who was an important inventor that helped create different sorts of things to help American um, manufacturing, and then also Harriet Tubman, who was also somebody that we're trying to put on the U.S. monetary note because she's a first woman to do a lot of things and important to African people because she helped free African people from bondages of slavery in the South and brought them to the unbondage of slavery in the North. And then so there's a lot of stuff that is being said and talked about during this month that people hold quite close to their chest. And for us in the African People's Socialist Party, the Uhuru movement, Black history is all the time. Like we actually have a theory called African internationalism that links together our historical relationship with the world all the time. So it's not just about figureheads and people, it's about the entire social economy of African people, the movement of African people throughout the world. And it didn't start at these colonial borders, but our history and our legacy of fighting, of struggle, of oppression is all linked to, the history of our people. So and because we do not adhere to these colonial borders, then our history is quite broad and quite huge in magnitude. So we can't just identify just one or two certain persons. But we also wanted to do this broadcast about reparations because um, Black history is also given to Black people. See, look, this is another sort of strategy by the oppressor to kind of hand over a day, a month, and it started as a week, I believe. Started, give us some time to talk about Black people because see, now we're open to this discussion around Blackness, and we know that Black people fought hard for the acknowledgement by the colonial state that we contributed to the society, that we aren't just a bunch of Negroes who came up from slavery, but that we were smart, educated, ambitious people who contributed to the overall broader society, even in places where you did not want us to be acknowledged. So I get the idea behind it, but this also was given to you. Like the United States had to say, okay, we're going to make this an official holiday, it's an official month, and what then does that mean for African people in the end? We get to acknowledge these folks that sometimes we don't get to acknowledge throughout the entire year, and then when it's over, we kind of either continue talking about the folks that we talked about, or we and say we're going to make Black history ourselves, or we're going to, just fall to the wayside. All the programs in the schools, your children don't do any more stories about MLK. Um, you kind of take down the RBG flags that are hanging from some of the public buildings, especially here where I live. And we get to go back to our normal days of being oppressed, except this time um, we are not acknowledging, the holiday of Black History Month. And I think it's really important too. I'm not knocking it to a certain degree. Like I feel like it's really important for Black people, especially when I was younger, where we get to where in other instances you may not talk about it, it may not even come up in your day, but it was a central point around about that's prideful, right? Like if you don't talk about Black people and all you see around you all the time is white people doing stuff, white people being geniuses, white people being that, and then you come to school and it's like, okay, we're gonna talk about Black people this month. I can see how um, that could be a source of pride and instillment in Black children. But so I'm saying all this to preface the PE today, which is reparations, and I'm actually going to reference a document that the party put out in 1983 called "Stolen Black Labor," and this is comrades are going to put it in the chat, but you can follow along with it. I'm also going to be talking about the party's history to not only bring up like the whole question of Black people and the importance of the total economy that Black people have contributed to it, but we're going to talk about what are the actionable things, what does reparations look like in real time. So once again, here we go. So I trying to figure out which thing was it on. Okay. So first of all, for those of you who do not know, I am this is an African National Women's Organization broadcast. African National Women's Organization is a member organization of the Uhuru movement. It was created by the African People's Socialist Party to bring African women into revolutionary political life. Sometimes we say that, sometimes we do not say that, but I thought it was really important here because as African National Women's Organization, we take on the African internationalist perspective theory. That's our theory, and that's how we explain the conditions of African people. And African women, and if you've looked at some of the previous broadcasts, you would have seen some of our references. We've done a couple of PEs on African internationalism and how it relates to patriarchy, African women, and the whole nine. And African internationalism also centers, like from the very beginnings of the party, has been um, the reparations has been the key cornerstone of the theory of African internationalism, and therefore every single part of the work that we do is reparations based. It's like getting what we need, making that demand in every single sector, not only making a demand but making it happen um, in practical ways. Um, but even if, as we are saying that we want to make reparations a household word, and that people are now talking about it more than they have talked about it in the past, that there have been movement around reparations demands in the Caribbean, in Europe, in Africa, and movement here in the United States. There have been bills being passed in some cities and in some states. There are reparations bills out, and discussions and laws and policies that are being made around reparations. We recognize that reparations is not something that is going to be given to us, because because first of all, it won't be given to us because that also allows for the oppressor to hold power over us. But if it is given, like if it is given to us, like if things turn right, and that means that the people who hold the power will then be relinquishing power, because there's so much money owed, so many things owed to African people, that the dynamics, the social economic fabric of the entire world would have to shift in order for African people to be paid what we are due. Um, but we also think, but even in that instance, we believe that reparations is a demand that we have to make because it's a revolutionary demand. It's a demand that African people must make, based on everything that we've had to experience and all of the things that you've learned during Black History Month and things that you've learned beyond Black History Month about the conditions of African people. And even what we're experiencing right now, reparations must be a demand. So as early as 1976, and the party was created in 1972, so 4 years after the party was created, we've been making this demand for African reparations. And in 1982, the party organized the first World Tribunal on, oh, this is bothering me, the first World Tribunal on reparations to African people, and it was held in Brooklyn, New York. And it basically determined that the United States owed $4.1 trillion at that time in 1982 for the crimes of genocide against African people, and the unpaid labor provided by us and the descendants of the formerly enslaved African people, that we were owed $4.1 trillion, and that was about 32 years ago. During that convention, we had some very notable people who were very important to the reparations struggle at that moment and also afterwards. So it was 7 years before John Conyers presented the reparations bill, HR 40. It was 6 years before the National Coalition of Black Reparations, or NCOBRA. Afeni Shakur was there from Panther 21. Dr. Leonard Jeffries, other Panther members, the Pan-African Congress was there. Queen Mother Moore was also there. So this was a heavy-hitting conference that included so many African people who have been discussing, what the 40 acre and a mule sort of thing for African people for some time, and they concretized it at this historical reparations conference. And right behind me here is the front page of the Burning Spear newspaper that memorialized that. And this is the stage and everything. So this was 400 years of oppression, and this is what African people were owed, $4.1 trillion. I'm going to now go over to the reading Black, the stolen Black stolen labor, right? Stolen Black labor, and I'm going to read the summation of the book. And this is basically a summary of reparations owed by the U.S. government that was determined. And this book was written in 1983, so a year after the World Tribunal on Reparations. And what it does is the whole entire book. It's not very long. Kind of talks about all of the reasons why, gives you data, facts, references, monetary amounts from 1856, like all the thing, a tracking, what was stolen at every point in history at this point, and what African people had lost compared to white people. So this is a summary of that section. So this is actually the conclusion on page 93. So if you're following along from the link that's been shared, then you should be able to read along with me. And it's not very long, so I promise it won't be too laborious. I'm skipping the first paragraph. Actually, let me read it. It says the summary of reparations owed by the U.S. government, by adding even a small amount for other ways that African people have been ripped off, besides the wage differential between 1945 and 1982, we can increase our estimate of what modern imperialism has stolen from 1.75 trillion to 2 trillion between 1945 and 1982. Added to the previous totals, then we arrive at a sum total of $4.1 trillion, $4,100 billion owed by the US government and capitalist class for reparations to African people. That was in 83. The workings of capitalism have always required that African people be maintained in a subservient status, maintained outside the North American economy where skilled labor carries out the final task of production, the realm of the North American proletariat and capitalists. The subservient status, which was extended to the whole world 100 years ago, is the real basis for capitalist profits. African people's oppression has changed forms over the years. The progression of this oppression shows that capitalism freely adapts every type of exploitation in order to amass capital, whether it bears resemblance to the historical periods of slavery, peasantry, or wage labor. It is all part of the capitalist mode of production. Indeed, such adaptation is as much a part of history of capitalism as is wage labor. In the first period, slave labor was utilized as the central factor for the primitive accumulation of capitalism, freeing up 600 billion in 1982 dollars in profit for the capitalist class. In the second period, the rise of colonialism, African people were transformed to peasants. While peasant labor exploitation represented an advance over slave labor in the eyes of many. In fact, it resulted in more efficient and thorough exploitation of African labor, and thus greater profits being taken, a total of 1.5 trillion or 1,500 billion from 1865 to 1945. In the third period, with the development of primitive neocolonialism, the African colony was transformed to the point where today 94% of Africans in the US are workers, with at least 2 trillion in the colonial profits taken by the capitalist class in this brief period. The exploitation foretells the proletarianization of colonies throughout the world and the ultimate decadence of the imperialist centers. So I'll stop here and continue. But, basically what it says is that, we owe some money and that there are three periods that the chairman is talking about: the pre-colonial uh, situation around Africans, the colonization of Africa and Africans, and then what we're dealing with in so-called modern times, and how much money then had been amassed during these three periods that total up to 4.1 trillion. When you break it down to the amount of wealth extracted per year, you may see even more dramatically how the exploitation rate of the African colony has increased with the growth of capital. During slavery, the capitalists extracted about 2.5 billion in 1982 dollars per year. During early colonialism, this figure averages out much higher to 20 billion per year extracted, or 8 times more than the previous period. And during modern primitive neocolonialism, the capitalist class has extracted 54 billion per year, or 2.7 times as much as the previous period, and 22 times as much during chattel slavery. This far surpasses the rate of population growth, which has increased tenfold since the period of chattel slavery. The transformation of the last 30 years, however, and the formation of the African colony into a proletarian colony has had two results. First, African labor is more efficiently exploited and greater profits derived. Second, African proletarians have come forward as a class with the vision and the capacity to once and for all overturn the cruel system of colonialism. The transformations of history, the continuing resistance of African people, causing continual changes in the material reality are fact. But primitive accumulation, colonialism, primary extraction persists. The terror persists. The dual label market persists. The territorial monopoly on consumption persists. Colonialism persists. African people has fought for 100 years against these conditions and are now poised to take on the whole structure of exploitation, U.S. imperialism. So what the chairman is writing about here in 1983 is still applicable to what we're dealing with right now, because we haven't thrown off the shackles of colonialism. So every year, every generation that we've produced is still contributing to this amount of reparations that is owed to African people. Even as technology and things get more sophisticated, and the ways that African people contribute to the labor economy becomes more and more sophisticated, that just increases the value of which, the reparations are owed to us. So in 1982, if it was $4.1 trillion, we can imagine that it's probably doubled or tripled or quadrupled since then, in terms of like what African people are contributing. And this is just in the US, right? Let's not even talk about what's happening throughout the world. And we've seen instances where in the Caribbean, CARICOM, certain in Caribbean countries are also talking about reparations that are owed to them from the British colonizers. We've seen where countries in Africa are saying that they need to get reparations. I think I can't remember the name of the country, but they were colonized. They were seeking reparations from Germany for exploitation there. And that there are different countries in Africa who are also making the reparations demand. And then, of course, if you're making the reparations demand, that these are things that are being coupled up with all the reparations demands around the world. So that's why the party believes that reparations is not going to be given, because if we really look at the scale at which African people were stolen, the colonialism, the enslavement, and all of the things that were captured because of our labor throughout the world, it will topple the entire system. So some of us are looking sometimes at reform, ways that we can get some of our reparations while maintaining sort of a relationship with the colonizer that doesn't threaten them. Like, see, you can give us reparations because, the Native Americans get reparations and it didn't, undermine your economy. And so we're trying to finagle it here in the United States in a way that will allow for us to get something back. And so that's kind of reformist in one view, but it's still something that forwards the reparations demand. In another hand, we're saying that reparations demand can be used to actually make the case to people who maybe haven't even talked about it before, to really talk about like, yo, this is how much we really owe. Like, we're owed the whole kit and caboodle. Like, we like everything. and when you get people talking about that and recognizing the power of their labor and themselves, then that opens it up to a whole other discussion around what really holds up this system of oppression and exploitation. And we're just talking about African people, there are a number of other people, nations, countries, and people all across the world that also have a reparations claim to deal with colonizers. And so combined as a whole entire world, what is owed to us is something that will undermine like the economic fabric of the world and capitalism in and of itself, because it can't maintain itself. So making the reparations demand, whether it's reformist or whether it's really an opening talk about revolution, is still a revolutionary demand. So I'll continue. In calling for reparations and building the African National Reparations Organization and organizing for bread, peace, and Black power, African people are building a massive struggle to win independence, to defeat imperialism in its very belly. The attempts by some members of the North American left, or the white left, to declare colonialism over and call for African workers to fall in behind their leadership is a betrayal of internationalism and of the real struggle for socialism. And I'll stop there because this is a really important point that the chairman is making, one that persists today too. Like, it's like colonialism is something of the past. It doesn't really apply to you today. What you have to deal with today is fascism or racism, but colonialism is gone. Like, the power structure and you being held underneath this system of oppression is no longer the same kind of thing that you did before when we actually had direct control over you. And what he's saying then is what is applicable now is that, yeah, it's still here because colonialism still exists. The labor trapped within the colonial mode of production that is robbed of African people still contributes to this whole questions of reparations. And it also, when somebody says colonialism doesn't exist, right? Like if it's the white left or the African petty bourgeoisie or something like that, then that really is about undermining what could be a reparations demand or undermining like the revolutionary demand for African people to be free. An example is I'm continuing reading. An example is the attempts by the petty bourgeois parties to make the central response to the current imperialist crisis a demand for jobs. They defend this tailing of the liberal bourgeoisie of the Democratic Party with the most simplistic economism. I'm gonna stop here too. I'm always like, when I read these older documents, and y'all know, if you follow this channel, you listen to the chairman, and you listen to other programs that come on the Burning Spear channel. And if you don't follow the Burning Spear news channel on YouTube, and you're watching us on Facebook or on our YouTube channel or on Twitter, then you wouldn't know that the chairman still talks about this thing, that the Democratic Party is like the wrangler of Black people. Black people are getting the hang of it more and more now, particularly now since people are like, they feel betrayed because of Biden, and that a couple years ago, one of the demands was vote or die, and we need more jobs, things like that. These are all the things that always gets Black people riled up to vote for the Democratic Party in the United States, which is typically the party that Black people usually vote for. So I'm going to continue. It is interesting that the North American leftists or the white leftists are now concerned about jobs when their unemployment rate approaches 8%. While we have suffered twice that even in the best periods of capitalism, they want their jobs back and privileges back and call for full employment. African people know that this alone means nothing. Under slavery, we certainly had full employment, worked from age 8 to our deaths. In our 40s and 50s, $4.1 trillion reveals that the only just struggle is the anti-colonial struggle. The only demand for freedom must demand reparations. Likewise, those North American or white leftists who came forth with proposal for Africans to regroup in the South, in the so-called Black Belt South, are trying to turn the clock of history backwards. They seek to hook up with certain dissatisfied petty bourgeois elements in the African community, the dissatisfaction of the uprooted peasant, the petty bourgeois longing for the past, not unlike the petty bourgeois revolutionism which Marx exposed in the ex-peasants of France. The call for reparations does not mean regrouping African people on the poor, worked-out farmlands of the South in an American version of Bantustans. The U.S. African colony persists and has maintained its strategic connections among African people all over the world, building the international African anti-colonial struggle. The African domestic colony has matured to a proletarian colony in a position to seize control of the cities and countrysides and the heart of the U.S. to demand the whole payback. The whole payback. The African working class has produced The necessary forward motion and strategy in the proletarian leadership of the African People's Socialist Party, which is taking responsibility to lead the working class to smash entirely the system of colonialism, to throw out entirely the capitalist class from power. All of the petty bourgeois political schemes have in the center the so called multinational analysis claiming that the whole working class, African and North American, is involved in a single contest with capitalism. Such an argument is used to mask their attempt to place African people's struggle under the leadership of the white petty bourgeoisie. Interesting, that term. We've changed since then, I think. In all of these schemes, African people's conditions is reduced to a matter of race, of some biological and non-political myths. This analysis is no different for the economist trade unionism under the North American left parties, the isolated revolutionism of the Black Belt South practitioner, and the liberal integrationism of the Democratic Party. They all defend colonialism. I mean, that's a really bold and powerful statement right there, especially as it digs into the African petty bourgeoisie, even the ones who may have a separatist sort of line, like the Black Belt South goal, or the Democratic Party, who says that we have to struggle for jobs. That even like this does not break the shackles of colonialism has on us. It actually says this is a solution inside of colonialism, even though these oppressive things are still impacting Black people, African people all over the world. These solutions that are being suggested are just things that will allow for the slaves to live a better life under slavery, or a less oppressive life under slavery. And for some people, African petty bourgeoisie, not the workers who actually are so burdened down with this, but for some people, this is enough. This is enough that allows them to get through the day, to buy a house, to get a car, to get more income and things like that. But all the while, that is still threatened because colonialism is still intact. And one of the things that we can see from this early document from 1983 is really the foundations of the building of the theory of African internationalism that has never changed. Even though there's some terms in here that need to be updated, but the basis of the struggle, the basis of the call for African liberation and the destruction of colonial mode of production and the destruction of imperialism and not following the white left and the white left attempt to use the I would say the resistance power of African people on their side and liquidate the fact that they are also the colonizer is really important. So and that's why we're going to talk about some of the ways that the party has approached some solutions to deal with the things that are mentioned here. So I'll continue to read, and I'm almost done. This study has undertaken to determine how much reparations is owed to African people by the U.S. government and the ruling class for 400 years of oppression. In exposing this history, however, it has done much more. We have shown that the primitive accumulation of capital was a process of theft from the African people, which began when the early bourgeois merchants set up slave forts on the African coast in the 15th century, and which has continued to this very day, spreading around the world as the brutal system of imperialism. We have demonstrated that the wealth stolen from African people and later from all colonized people constitutes not a side contribution to capitalist profits, but the very basis of capitalist wealth. The foundation of capitalism is the stolen labor and all of that wealth that was produced from that stolen labor from African people and other colonized people. We have reviewed the changes that have occurred in the form of exploitation of African people and how the resistance of African people has forced the oppressors to abandon each successive form of exploitation. And we have shown how the domestic African colony is now strategically located and self-conscious to take on the task of overthrowing U.S. imperialism itself, to lead a struggle with which will unite the efforts of Africans all over the world and mobilize all progressive and revolutionary classes and nations whose interest is in the overthrow of U.S. imperialism. By understanding the essential character and workings of colonialism, by understanding the position and mission of the African working class, our people are armed with the truth, which is critical for successful revolutionary struggle. As Marx himself said, theory, when it grips the masses, is invincible. The demand for reparations, the campaign for 4.1 trillion in reparations, as defined in this study, goes to the very heart of the contradiction, sums up the historical oppression of the African colony and the ways that this oppression has been the cornerstone of imperialist profits. Reparations is central to resolving the colonial oppression of African people and throwing down the capitalist class to their rightful place. The African People's Socialist Party and the African National Reparations Organization is now providing the programs and working class leadership for the anti colonial struggle of Black people in the US, which leads to the entire struggle for socialism. You know, the party has the saying, that's the end of it, by the way, that I'm going to read. The party has a saying that the rose of socialism is painted black. Not, and so when, like, I remember when Bernie Sanders in the United States was running for president, and he was pushing for this kind of socialism, and somebody had asked him, do you believe in reparations to African people? And he says no. Even though he calls himself a socialist, right? Like, so there's a white left socialism, right? There's a white left socialism that believes that socialism is just, you know, just the equalization of society, and that everybody, excuse me, everybody will get like their share once you equalize society, but it doesn't really address this whole question of colonialism, and not the question of colonialism, the very real, practical things that impact people who are under colonialism, right? So it's not just that, you know, we're going to make sure the white workers get as much as the Black workers and the Asian workers and all of that stuff. You can't really do that without really addressing the question of this longstanding theft of African people's labor. And so when a party says the road to socialism is painted black, like, true socialism isn't when white workers organize everybody to, you know, fight the white bosses. It's when African workers who are in the pits of Africa, who are transforming the earth into Holland dens of materialist exploit, when they resist. And the white workers unite with that, because the white workers depend on whatever it is that the African workers are pulling out of the ground so that they can go into their factories in Europe, so that they can transform those things into things that can be used for the production or uses for something else. So when African workers are striking, that means they're not getting what they need in Europe. And if they don't unite with that strike that's happening in Africa, then that means that they are sitting on their demand for jobs and for this materials to come out of Africa is also a demand that colonialism stay in place, that their jobs are dependent upon the enslavement of African people and the hyper exploitation of African people on the continent. So that's why this whole question of workers uniting is really really asinine, because you don't really explore this colonial question. The African People's Socialist Party have made a critique of that for a very long time. So back to the point I was making about about Bernie Sanders and reparations, is that when socialists talk about, you know, equalizing society and we need to have jobs for everybody, that this whole question of colonialism doesn't take into account the very real lives of African people who are experiencing that. So we say the road to socialism is painted black because the only way that the world is going to experience true socialism is if the African workers, if African people are using the resources that come out of our land for ourselves, and we are able to share it with the world in a way that is equitable for us, not what is equitable for other people and what is determined for African workers to have. So, you know, the demand for reparations speaks about all of that and digs into all of that. That's why, like, you could have like the reformist element of it, and then you could also have like the revolutionary element, which opens up this whole question around capitalism, the colonial mode of production, imperialism, and all the things that really provide a pedestal for even a Black History Month to even exist. So I would just recommend that everybody read this document, the Stolen Black Labor and Political Economy document that we've linked in the chat. And if you've missed it, then, you know, just go to the party's website, apspuhuru.org, click on reparations, and there is a sublink there that talks about the history, and you'll find this document there, some videos and other sort of reference materials that talk about the long history of the party, and the role that we have played in making the reparations a household word and never letting it go. So one of the things that I mentioned in terms of like saying like it's been more than a discussion around the monies, because there's a lot of people who are still focused on the money. Like this is African people owe $4.1 trillion, 4 times now, right? And we have things that are in legislation. We have discussions about what that looks like in terms of like check, um, and a lot of that really is like theoretical. Like it's just like in the world right now, discussions that happen, but what is the practical, real life examples of what reparations look like? So the party does more than just that, right? And I want to also say that this document that we just read, that was published in 1983, but written in 1982 for the World Tribunal on Reparations, um, really laid the foundation for the founding of the African National Reparations Organization. And the chairman actually took this on the road. Like in 1983, he organized around reparations and even won white people to reparations of African people through the Irish Republican Socialist Party, who were also fighting for freedom from Great Britain. And actually, they conducted an interview or a press conference declaring that the Irish Republican Socialist Party said they would refuse to take money from Irish people in the U.S. who were against African liberation. And that was huge because this is still 1983, and what we've known of Irish people here, that they when they came over from Ireland in the early part of the 19th century and late part of they were always considered the white niggers of Europe. You know what I mean? So like they had to shirk off this sort of uh, association with African people and become white people in the United States. So for the Irish Republican Socialist Party to make that claim at that time is uniting with the liberation of African people and denouncing that sort of behavior that can happen when you become white here in the United States. Um, Another point is that making reparations we wanted to make reparations the property of the people. There's the way that even we see this with the arrest CPS work too, like with the legislations around family policing and regulation system, and all these things. That there's a heavy instance to go straight to legislation. We want to change laws. We want to change policies now, and this is the way we think that we're going to really impact the lives of families, et cetera. Which in many cases it can do that. But in most cases, the majority of the people don't even know that these things are happening. They're being impacted by it. And unless they're really being impacted by it, you don't know that there's some massive or small movement to kind of transform laws that will impact somebody's ability to get reparations and or not get their children taken. So making these demands the property of the people is super important. That's how it becomes like a mass movement. So the party aim was to move beyond legislation and the courts to something that the masses have to demand. And at the point when the masses demand it, then it will take on a revolutionary character. So the African National Reparations Organization did that for 11 years, really working to influence the reparations discussion and opening it up in different forums, having different tribunals throughout the U.S., and connecting with African people all over the world. So this is really important to the foundations of how we got to a lot of places in our early part of the party. While we were in England, while we were in the Caribbean, while we were in Africa, in so many cases, is like we were, forwarding this whole question of reparations. So, saying all of that there was all of the basis for reparations. We got all the numbers, and the party was like, okay, now that we've done this, like, what do we do with it? So the party says, like, we gotta actively give. We can't wait for the the colonial state to make some determination. We're not at the point yet where Africans are making the African revolution a reality, right? So we have to begin to realize some of the objectives of African people right now. And that means really opening it up, this reparations questions, and making that demand and getting reparations at this moment. So the party began to get reparations and still are getting reparations right now. And And since 1985, I believe, they've created the African People Solidarity Committee, whose responsibility it is to go into the white community and win white people to the position that African people need to be free and make this reparations demand. And a lot of this work has been really important to um, some of the economic institutions that the African People Socialist Party create for African people in our communities, in particular the Black Power Blueprint, but also the sheer wit and grit of African people to actually make something that lasts beyond ourselves is all a part of the reparations work. We also, the reparations that we earn go toward the Black Power Blueprint and St. projects in St. Louis. And if you are attending our our convention next month in St. Louis, you'll get to see some of the projects of the Black Power Blueprint. And that's what's so wonderful about it. Some people raise money, so they're going to do this and that. And you never see like anything, not even the nail that goes into the wall that might build a building. Like, and the African People Socialist Party, through the reparations work, have been able to, purchase so many lots of property and open up different opportunities for African people in one of the most economically depressed sectors of the city. Um, it went toward the Uhuru furniture stores that were in Oakland and Philadelphia. And then it goes toward the Black Power 96 FM in St. Petersburg, Florida. And the Black is Back Coalition for Social Justice, Peace, and Reparations. This is also another organization that is co-created by the party that makes the reparations demand and organizes other African-led organizations around reparations questions as well. So, and then we also ran electoral campaigns, right? The things that the U.S. government is indicting our comrades for, that made the reparations demand during electoral campaigns, right? So we ran a white comrade who was a solidarity member for electoral position, and in St. Petersburg, Florida, and it was votehirsch.com. I don't know if that still's up. We ran Director Akile, who hosts the Omali Talk Meets on Sundays, twice in St. Petersburg, Florida. One of the reparations campaign slogans was "Make the South Side Black Again." This is a campaign slogan that was being used to win people to vote for this comrade, and it won the in a very majority white city of St. Petersburg, Florida, that used to be majority African. It won white people to this position, like make the South Side Black again. And it wasn't just like some demand of like, oh, we just need Black people here. It was like Black people used to be here, and the reason why we aren't here is because of gentrification, because of your economic starvation. And so a lot of the all of the campaign demands were about restoring all of the ways that will allow for Black people to afford to live in the South Side of St. Pete, and you restore all of the things that white power has taken away from the African community. So that demand for making the South Side Black again was a reparations demand. And then we also do reparations work. Like even the Arrest CPS work is reparations work, right? So we talk about uh, all the things that are being stolen from Black families through the family regulation system, and what needs to happen in order for these families to be repaired. So when we add the number, the 4.1 trillion from 1983, and we just even look at this sector, this niche thing that is happening. It's not niche, actually. It's very broad and large scale. The kidnapping of African children, the criminalization of African parents, the labor, the resources that go into making that happen. It's a very sophisticated system that robs us of our time, money, and our children. And if we just add just that piece of the colonial pie to that number, the number then we were talking about quadruple since 1983, or probably be tenfold, based on just this section of the colonial pie. So and so people need to understand too that the reparations demand is a socialist demand. Like if you can't really be a socialist if you're not saying you down for reparations. And I would challenge you, like if you know some white folks would be like, yeah, be socialist, we believe in communism, and like, do you believe in reparations to African people? And they say no, you have to be like, side look, and you ask them why. And I think there's a certain way that African people have to be able to ask these questions, right? Because sometimes you might not feel confident and able to challenge some white people because you might think that they might know some shit that you don't know, but you know everything. You know that African people were stolen, African people were kidnapped, our labor were used for 400 years as enslaved folk potions, colonialism happened. These are all things, and reparations to us is due. But the reparations question also opens up that revolutionary question, right? Like, so when somebody says they are against reparations to African people, why? Why? You know, that's really suspect. And anybody who's a white left or some communist or some socialist who don't believe in reparations to African people, you have to really question their allegiance to you or allegiance to anything that requires liberation. You have to, if you're in their organization, you got to get out of that thing pretty quickly. Um, and I think it's really important too that as an African woman, I don't know if there's a distinction between gender. I don't think that there is, but I think it's really important to say that my um, goal for liberation is tied up in the whole reparations question. When we think about all the things that happen to African women, that happen, not happened, that happens to African women and femmes every day, um, just, all of the things that are being stolen from us, what has been stolen from us violently, economically, things that prevent us from moving forward financially. There are so many ways that African women in particular deserve a special set of reparations. You know what I mean? And I think that should be explored too if we're talking about this whole reparations question and applying it to um, policy and law. This segment of this population needs to be explored in terms of like really digging out like what's owed to African people as a whole, but like specifically African women and even African men too, because African men endure a lot under the colonialism as well. So um, but I think exploring the gender spectrum too is really important to like really dig out more pockets of money of what's owed to African people. Socialism cannot exist inside of capitalism. I'm reading some points because it's like reparations is a socialist demand, and we're saying that you can't have reparations inside of capitalism. Like you can't do it. Like it's like we said before, it's going to undermine the entire system. Capitalism won't be able to withstand itself because all of the money that it makes. And so it's not even just saying that what's in the bank is owed to us. Reparations would mean that it would have to stop capitalism, the colonial mode of production would have to stop what it's doing, or else we'll still be owed reparations still. So, like, in the moment when reparations are given to African people, let's just say that the state is still intact, right? And they're like, okay, we're going to give reparations. They have to stop exploiting the world, exploiting African people, because if they don't, then this reparations is just going to be like a thing that's going to continue over and over and over again, and they can't afford that. So you might as well just give up and just let African people, as we struggle for our own stuff, like just give up and just say, okay, you guys can be self-determined. We ain't even gonna fight no more. We just want to let this go. We just done with it. But that's just not the way that the colonial mode of production is going to work, and we see how hard that capitalists stay trying to maintain themselves. Um, as a communist and African internationalist, there isn't any social program that can make capitalism good. And I'm going to go right back to what Bernie Sanders was saying around his when he was running for president, and he was talking about all the ways in which we don't have to give direct reparations to African people, but that we're going to do this for loans, and we're going to make this economy better, and we're going to do all these things to kind of even out society. And it's like there's nothing that you can do to liquidate the fact that what was already stolen from African people is you're way behind. You're hundreds of years behind in terms of righting the wrongs of the past. Like reparations didn't start in 1985. Like you know what I mean? Like it's something that's ongoing. So you just can't say that we're going to have better jobs now. And what the piece that we just read pointed out was that African people been jobbing. We've been the job. We've been working our entire history, especially under capitalist colonialism, right? Like so we haven't had a moment's rest. So it's not about more jobs or anything like that, or trying to equalize some pension and stuff like that. It's about all the time that we also didn't get paid and what you gain from that because of that free labor. Um, and because of that free labor, capitalism as a system was created. Um, and and the demand for reparations is a demand to destroy capitalism, which capitalists won't do. It's a demand to make what's wrong right. And it isn't something that requires white people to agree. I mean, only if you are revisionist or reformist or somebody who's negotiating with white people and having a seat at their table, you need them to agree to something. But if you're an African internationalist and you want to overturn the system and you recognize that because the amount is so large, it will likely not be paid by white people, that we're going to have to take our reparations. And that's the ultimate conclusion that the party comes to, is that we're going to have to take our reparations, and not just for reparations' sake, but for the freedom and liberation of African people, and to free up the world from the grips of colonial mode of production, so that we can actually start enjoying the fruits of our labor. Okay. And like the demand for reparations is not just about a check. It's about our lives. It's about what was stolen and how to realign ourselves with our lives. It's about looking at your comrades, your friends, your family who are struggling. Just within this week, a friend of the family was imprisoned. You know what I mean? Like not a friend, a family member was in prison on some stuff, and the conditions under which he was imprisoned, um, is our colonial conditions that are created around us and shift us to make decisions that we would ultimately not make. Listen, African people don't want to go to prison. African people want to be free. We want all the things that are due to us, and because we live in bombed out areas and we don't have enough food. We live in food deserts and we don't have enough childcare and we don't have enough family members who make enough money that will allow us to live life high on the hog. There are certain circumstances that are created and foster, behaviors that lead African people to prison. And we say that that's a part of the colonial intention. And so reparations addresses that too, and looks into those segments of the population that are now being stolen. Because if you look in terms of labor in the prison system in the United States, African and other imprisoned people are participating in another theft of labor through that process. So reparations for us is really a really critical issue. As you can see, it's tied into all of the work that the party has done. There's documents upon documents, history upon history, example upon example around what getting reparations can do, what it really means to African people. And I think during this month and beyond, that we have to pay attention to just the nature of the colonial mode of production, and that Black history is not about some salient um, sort of remembrance of some foregone singular African, but it really is about continuing the legacy of the fight for justice and liberation of African people everywhere. And that includes your fight and liberation from the confines of the colonial mode of production, the freeing up of your labor power and your resources, so that we can actually use all of the things that are due to us as African people that are being tied up in this colonial mode of production. So I'm going to pause here and we're going to open it up for questions. And I'm going to bring my comrade Coco back on the screen to make uh, announcements before we go into those questions.
All right. Uhuru, like I was in it. So until you mentioned that you would have to stop, I was just keep going. And we could like I was wanted that to be like a discussion, you know. So Uhuru President yesterday. So everyone, we're on our way to the Q&A session. Please prepare your questions. Remember to share your name and location and then your question. So as President yesterday stated before we go into the Q&A, we're going to have some announcements here. All right. All right. And so it's not. All right, so we call on women worldwide to join the African National Women's Organization. We are the only anti colonial, anti imperialist, revolutionary organization for African women. We have members in Africa, Europe, Latin America, and all around the United States, and was leading on everyday issues concerning African women. We are not just on the internet. We are on the ground in our communities organizing for African liberation. Join the international collective of African women building the revolutionary capacity of African women. To learn more about membership and joining AMWO, visit amwouhuru.org/join. And show your material solidarity with the work of the African National Women's Organization. We have big things planned this year, like beginning to work on our headquarters, organizing a flea and farmers market to support African economic development. We have events and travel. We are an organization of the African poor and working class, so we need your support to make these projects happen. If you can't become a member, consider becoming. If you can't become a member, consider becoming a sustaining donor. With donation levels starting at just $5 a month, or you can renew your support today. We also set one-time donations of any amount, so don't wait until the program ends. Donate now. To donate, go to annualuhuru.org/donate or cash app us at Annual Uhuru. All right, wear your politics with Anwol. I love this shirt. It's so comfy. Anwol shop features t-shirts, sweatshirts, travel bags, mugs, hoodies, and even socks. Profits from merch sales support the campaigns of Amwell, including Arrest CPS and Uhuru Kijiji Child Care Collective. Mom, go ahead and watch. Mom, where's my bag off? All right. All right. And so become a decolonizer for Amwell's Economic Development Project and Decolonize Hair and Body. Decolonize Hair and Body are natural personal care products that highlight natural ingredients and traditional care practice used by indigenous people all around the world, in addition to featuring images and quotes of African revolutionaries. They are good, from butters to conditioners to oils. Decolonize has you covered head to toe. Make sure your next purchase of skincare products are from us at decolonize.com. You can reach out to one of our distributors, and we're also available in the Metro DC area. Um, Hands off Uhuru, hands off Africa. Support the Uhuru Three and our fight against the U.S. indictments. Defend the African freedom struggle. Defend the African liberation struggle. Defend the Uhuru movement. To find out more and how you can support, go to handsoffuhuru.org. If you enjoyed tonight's program, we'd like to help and would like to help us produce shows in 2024, volunteer with us. And was looking for producers, interpreters, and chat moderators for future broadcasts and for our convention. Email us at info@annualuhuru.org if you'd like to share your skills. Political Education and Paintball, a local event hosted by the San Diego Annual Branch, will take place Sunday, February 25th. Register at annualuhuru.org/events and click on the event to register. Come back and join us this Thursday, February 18th. Join Annual members Jay Coco and President yesterday as they discuss the mainstream cooptation of Black holidays and pandering towards African people while we are still fighting for the rights and freedom. Uhuru, I can't wait for that discussion. Harriet's Daughters Book Club and Study Group is a monthly virtual discussion that centers around African liberation related literature. For the months of March and April, we will be reading The War Before, the true story of becoming a Black Panther, keeping the faith in prison, and fighting for those left behind by Sophia Bukhari. Next discussion will be on April 14th, 2024 at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Visit annualuhuru.org/events to stay up to date of all upcoming international, national, regional, and local programs, events and programs. All right, get ready to take a stand. ANWO calls on African women and our supporters worldwide to attend the annual Black Women's Convention. The 2024 theme is taking a stance against imperialism, colonialism, and neocolonialism. African women from every city, town, province, country, island, and village must attend this convention. The convention will be hybrid, online, and in person in St. Louis, Missouri. To find out more and to register, go to convention.annualuhuru.org. Don't wait. And Annual has booked some dynamic women from all over the world to convene during the ninth annual Black Women's Convention. Again, don't wait to if you're interested or if you're interested in Annual and support Annual, register today. We have a nice list of women, all like I said, all over the country, all over the world coming to visit, coming in for this convention. I'm excited. And Huru, so let me go ahead and bring President yesterday back up for our Q&A session.
I'm back. Oh, we're gonna fix this Facebook thing. We thought we had it this time, and not quite. But I didn't see any questions, so I'm hoping that it was a really good discussion, and people can unite overall. It was no contention, anything like that, and we have another discussion happening on Sunday, which is a lot more, casual or whatever. But yeah. I don't have anything else to add, actually.
I mean, I have so you were talking about, I was listening, I was in it. So I'm always going to have commentary back. But so you were talking about how we can't have, reparations under the current system. I think that's such an important piece that people miss because people get caught up in the dollar, they get caught up in the money, but the money is not power.
Mm-hmm.
And I recently watched Flowers of the New Moon,
Mm-hmm.
um, which is about, these native people, the Osage people, finding oil on their land. And they're not even from Osage.
Mm-hmm.
This is their reservation.
Mm-hmm.
And they end up having this money. And even in these times that they were living, I think they're the 1800s, and they're paying like $300, $400 for things because they didn't have the power and the freedom.
Mm-hmm.
They still had to get their resources from their colonizers, from the people that drove them to this land, and they were just exploited from that point on. So, I think that, and I related. I couldn't even finish the movie because it was just sickening. The
Mm-hmm.
way the colonizers be colonizing in that movie is
Mm-hmm.
sickening. They anytime they want a head colonizer, they always call on Leonardo DiCaprio. And it was just sickening to watch, and I relate that to us. I had to stop and think, and I thought, like, if African people got reparations today, they would have used the same. They don't even have to invent new ways to treat us. They could just use that as point of reference,
Mm-hmm.
cause inflation, which they already put us through inflation
Mm-hmm.
with this fake hysteria. That's another story. But they'll cause inflation, and then they'll just slowly start killing us off, the ones who are able, like, make it very specific how we can inherit, like they did the Osage people. And then you know um then make it difficult when we, and then kill us, ultimately kill out the people, take their land, which is crazy.
It's
And
like
then push them on.
the document we were reading, which basically said that you know uh, slavery wasn't efficient
Yeah.
in terms of stealing labor. Like slavery, like so when they supposedly handed us freedom, the and Africans entered into the labor market. This created this balloon in the amount of labor power that was contributed to the U.S. economy because of now these African people that were trapped as peasants on the land are now open into the industrialization of the U.S. economy, and what happened in those places too provided another platform for exploitation and oppression of African people, but at a higher scale. And of course, what I was saying more about, like even today, when ways of labor are more sophisticated, less backbreaking in some instances in the U.S. and maybe in other metropoles, that you know, so what you but so it's more sophisticated, and so it's still robbing us of our labor power, and robbing us of money, and adding more money to the bank. And I appreciate what you just said in terms of like if a check if the relations of power are still the same, and we're allowing the United States government in this instance, because we live in the U.S., to decide how much money we're going to get, and we're going to have a check, they're going to slowly they're going to do everything in their power not to give us the full amount. Number one. Number two, they're going to slowly siphon it back by creating, say, for example, the Black Belt South thing is something that's institutionalized through a reparations bill of some sort, right? Black people fled to the Black Belt South, so this is essentially a new reservation. And within that 5-state radius, then we would imagine that if somebody were to travel out, step outside of that border, that things would probably be a lot cheaper than it would be inside
Hmm.
of that border. You know what I mean? And so they'll, because of all the Black people there using their reparations money, it's going to be big times and there's going to be all kinds of ways to siphon that money out of African people. So like, so it's not just like you said about a check. It's about really the entire uh, infrastructure of the world, and capitalism as a colonialism at the seat of that has to be destroyed, so that it's not just up to individual African or whatever, but that these resources are being used to improve overall the life, so that we don't have to go run tell that check to go get a house, because houses will be aplenty, roads will be aplenty, electricity, everything will be aplenty. You know what I mean? So I appreciate that.
Right.
I still don't see the new questions, but okay. Thank y'all for watching. Tell me where you watching from. Let's do that. Let's if you where you watching
Right.
from, so I can shout you out. And I appreciate you hanging in there with us for the whole program. So we definitely want to appreciate everybody who's still watching, and those who will be watching us later. And so, or can we not just get text or chats? Okay, all right. Winter Park,
All right.
California. I thank you, Conrad. Ooh, all right. We got
Uhuru,
KTA in the building. Can't California. Um,
California.
and speaking of California, this is like a whole question of like the Mexican reparations work too, right? Like I know there's contradictions in California between people, but like the reality is that half of the so-called United States was stolen from Mexico, and that used to be Mexico, and this whole question of like Mexican people getting reparations and their land back, the whole question of settler colonialism is really impactful for the state of California, and not only the
Mhm.
state of California, but Texas, New Mexico, all these other places. Yes, Viva Union del Barrio,
Viva
and we're going to have
Union.
comrades from Union del Barrio at the convention too. So that's really
Mhm.
exciting. Yeah. So yeah. I don't like to like. So I'm cool with ending early if we don't got no comment. Thank you, Comrade Don, for hanging in there with us. We really
Right.
appreciate you. Appreciate that. So I don't like. So we haven't seen any questions or anything coming through. So I just want to close us out then and just appreciate
All right.
everybody who are watching and will watch. And thank you so much. And reparations now. We'll be back on Sunday as we talk about more ways that co-optation of Black History Month and reparations are due to African people. Uhuru, and have a good night.